Michelin Wilds, Schwalbe Eddy Currents. Which one is better? Let's find out, shall we? What's crack-a-lacking, guys and girls? Hopefully everyone's doing alright. I know I am. Yes, the time has come for us to put against these tyres in which we've been hearing about for so long, the Schwalbe Eddy Currents and the Michelin Wilds. Two e-bike specific tyres which have been dominating the scene since the moment in which we've seen them back in 2019. I, for which, have had an opportunity to test both tyres in a range of tyre sizes and tyre width, ranging from 27.5 by 2.6 to 27.5 by 2.8 and 29 by 2.4 to 29 by 2.6. Now, before we jump into this video, I guess we need to establish the ground rules before we can find out which one is better. Number one, these tyres have not been gifted, loaned or provided to me by any of these manufacturers or indeed a retailer. I have purchased them out of my own pocket, and between me and you, it cost me a small fortune. So therefore, any opinions I may have not been influenced by any external influence. Number two, the wheel set I decided to use these tyres on were the Roval wheel sets. In particular, the Roval Traverse. Amongst being a stock tyre on the Specialized Levo and the Specialized Kenevo, they were a pretty easy wheel set in order for me to source aftermarket, as well as being able to eliminate any variables in relation to hub engagement, spoke tension, and any other kind of variables which may influence my feedback regarding the tyres in which I would receive whilst in usage. Number three, the EMTBs I opted to use whilst testing these tyres ranged between the Specialized Levo Hardtail, the Specialized Levo FSR, the Specialized Kenevos, because I own more than two, my Bafang Ultra EMTB fleet, as well as my Bafang M400 EMTB fleet. This allowed me to test the tyres in both configurations of 27.5, 29 and mullet setup, so at the very least I could eliminate any variables as to whether or not a particular wheel size influenced any form of opinion I may have regarding a particular tyre. And most important, ladies and gentlemen, number four, which is, this is my opinion. Whilst I do have what could arguably assumed as sketchy methods of data acquisition which I've compiled for the purposes of evidence regarding this video, this is my opinion, so therefore there will be some scrutiny amongst all of you, I have no doubt. But bear this in mind, ladies and gentlemen, if this video is going to help you gauge as to which tyre you need to purchase, then make sure you watch the entire video so you can get a better understanding as to each respective tyre, which you might as well jump into right now. So there is a possibility that some of you probably don't have a clue as to what the hell I'm talking about. Schwalbe Eddy who, Michelin what? Well, to make sure that all of us are on the same page, we might as well take a step back and address the item itself in terms of what is considered e-bike specific. E-bike specific components are not something you would typically find on a regular mountain bike. Their sole purpose of being engineered for the purposes of EMTB usage due to the fact of the increased weight, the increased torque in which is going through the drivetrain, as well as the increased usage and mileage you would get out of an EMTB versus a regular mountain bike. In short, ladies and gentlemen, if you've got an EMTB, these are the components in which you may want to consider buying in order to maximize the usage. Now, between me and you, ladies and gentlemen, I was a bit skeptical at first when I was introduced to the concept of EMTB or e-bike specific. I mean, after all, what was the point? But having said that though, over time I started to warm up to the idea, because I indeed started to notice that you could get more mileage out of an EMTB versus a regular mountain bike consistently with not putting as much effort in as what you would do on a regular mountain bike. In short, ladies and gentlemen, I found that my chain was breaking and wearing out more, my cassettes needs to be swapped out even more, my brake pads needs to be swapped out definitely a lot more, and my tyres, well, yeah, definitely the tyres. which led me down a slippery slope of finding out which EMTB specific tyre was right for me. I mean, after all, contrary to the fact that you would pick your tyres indicative of the terrain and what you were typically riding, these EMTB tyres didn't really denote that, in which case you had to kind of walk into it a little bit blind, which we might as well discuss the ethos between each manufacturer so that you guys can have a better understanding between the two before we jump into the comparison itself. Now, of course, as many of you know, both Schwalbe and Michelin have been making tyres for years. I'm talking years, ladies and gentlemen. So it's quite easy for us to understand that they both have a rich heritage in terms of what they do and what they can bring to the table. But in particular, we're going to be focusing on the e-bike specific tyres in which they both offer. So let's talk about the Michelin Wilds first, and we'll go through the description as to what it denotes on the packaging.
Keep on rolling. The Michelin Wilds is an electric mountain bike tyre that is designed to take you further. With both front and rear specific tyres designed specifically for the e-bike, the E-Wilds tyres are perfect for power assisted mountain biking in challenging conditions. Using E-Gum X, a new rubber comprising lateral and central rubbers designed to optimise grip with the tread pattern from the Enduro ranges for better hold. Due to its gravity shield casing from enduro competitions, this offers great protection from EMTB riders. An inner layer and central rubber improve performance and rolling strength while reducing energy consumption. The E-Wilds rear tyre makes the most of your bike's power even on climbs. Extra protection based on its pinch protection technology with absorb the energy from pinch flats and its gravity shield casing from the enduro competition range. More kilometers due to the new generation atop of the range rubbers that give better rolling strength and lower energy consumption.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's see what the Eddy Currents have to say then, shall we?
The revolution for EMTBs, our first real EMTB specialist for all mountain and enduro. It allows uncompromising riding even uphill, even fierce acceleration, as well as allowing technical riding and trails. Its solid appearance comes from the stable blocks, more rubber and big widths. Key features include travel design inspired by motocross with massive stable studs in centre and the shoulder areas for reliable riding behaviour. Concise V-grooves in the centre and the side blocks for direct, precise steering characteristics. Specially adjusted design for front and rear wheel use. Maximum protection and braking traction throughout massive blocks and transmits sufficient power to the ground even on the steepest climbs. And hard wearing thanks to the large volume of centre studs.
So now that we've got the descriptions out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, we might as well dive into the nooks and crannies of this video. Let the comparison begin. So the Michelin Wilds tyres were the first tyre I actually tested. The first tyre combination I actually tested was 27.5 by 2.6 and the 27.5 by 2.8. So I had two pairs. I opted to primarily concentrate with a 2.8 at first originally, which is a front specific tyre, and the 2.6 rear specific tyre on the Specialized Levo. I gotta be honest, I actually really like that combo. It really did work, and again I used it for the Levo FSR, and then funnily enough for the Levo hardtail I opted for the 27.5 by 2.8 front and rear, and then I opted for the 2.6 front and rear for the Levo FSR. They both complemented the tyres pretty nicely, but I did feel that the Levo hardtail was a bit overkill for it because, you know, it didn't really need an e-bike specific tyre in my humble opinion. But for the Levo FSR itself, yeah, it definitely complemented it. One interesting thing which I did notice was the range, as well as the level of a system which I could get away with using. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, Specialized, you have 3 levels of assist: Eco, Trail and Turbo. And predominantly with the Levos, including the Canevos to an extent actually, I predominantly just use Eco and Trail. Turbo I kind of use as my get out of jail free card in case, you know, a climb gets that steep where, you know, that 11th or the 11th gear of the 42 tooth cog is not going to be sufficient enough in order for me to power up something steep. But in terms of overall usage for grip, for speed, for rolling, those tires are pretty versatile, and I'll even go as far as to say that, you know, I've used those tires in a wide range of conditions: wet, dry, loose, solid, gnarly tech, snow, slush, hard packed. You know, the list goes on. And you know, even though I've got riding footage when I was back at Canuck at the time in which I was testing them, you know, the tires are, in my honest opinion, versatile. It was eventually when I moved on to the 29-inch variants, which I did test for the Levo itself, because that bike can use 29-inch wheels. Again, I was humbly surprised to find that the tires still had the same consistency as to what I recognized for the 27.5 counterparts. And I ain't gonna lie, I was pleasantly surprised. I really did like those tires. It was something in which I actually said to myself, you know what, these tires are going to be a staple for this bike. However, my opinion soon changed when I slapped them on the Fang Ultra EMTBs. Now, don't get me wrong, ladies and gentlemen, I completely understand the fact that the Fang Ultra EMTBs are something abnormal of an EMTB motor. In fact, technically speaking, the Bafang Ultras or the M620s or the G5010s, whatever you want to refer to them as, they're not technically designed for EMTB usage. They're just motors which people automatically just designated for EMTB usage for the extreme end. And with 160 newton meters of torque with 30 amps consistently going through it, and well, you know, other variants in which technically makes it illegal to use on the roads, those motors would actually be the straw which broke the camel's back in relation to those motors. In particular, I did notice that my first set of E-Wilds didn't last long. Like they did not last long. I ripped so many side knobs off that thing. It was like, okay, this tire is it's a bit too soft. I mean, it's not soft in the grand scheme of things. It's actually a very tough, and yeah, okay, fine, it's a heavy tire, but it was the straw which broke the camel's back, ladies and gentlemen, putting it mildly. Of course, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Bafang Ultra EMTBs I have at my disposal, I have both a 27.5 variant and a 29er. So both the tyres were used on those bikes. In particular, the Saviour, the blue one, used the 27.5 by 2.8 up front and the 2.6, similar to what the Levo was running, and the Freedom, the black one, used a 29 by 2.6 up front and a 2.4 in the rear, though I did have two sets of the 29er variants anyway, so I was able to kind of flip and flop and change depending on what I preferred. But after testing them in different combinations, it soon became apparent that with more power going through the wheel, or the rear wheel in particular, obviously the consumable part of tyres became more noticeable, which is, it doesn't matter which e-bike specific tyre you go with, eventually they're just going to wear out. But again, because the M620 motor is an extreme motor, the longevity was somewhat questionable. Eventually, the last bike in which I opted to test the E-Wild on was the second Kenevo. Now, the second Kenevo currently, which I'm looking at now, is running a 27.5 by 2.6 up front and a 2.6 in the rear, which I do like actually. But before I actually got the Fox 36.4, I was running this bike briefly as a mullet. So spoiler alert, ladies and gentlemen, technically I've got a Lyric 180 with which uses a 29er wheel going spare. Don't know whether or not I'll keep it or not actually. I purchased it cheap, so we'll find out what I do with it. Maybe I'll slap it on a different bike. But the point being, that bike, the Kenevo number 2, I did run as a mullet, and it does work, but it was just for the purpose of seeing whether or not a mullet setup regarding the E-Wild did work. The combination of mullet I did go for was a 29 by 2.6 up front and a 27.5 by 2.6 in the rear. I did find that the 27 by 2.4 up front was a bit too narrow for me, so I went with a bigger tire up front. I mean, again, it's an e-bike, and you know, it's a Kenevo, 180mm travel front and rear. It works okay, but you know, it's one of those things in which I'm reminded that the Kenevo technically isn't optimized for a mullet setup. But in terms of the feedback and whatnot, actually, it was the same as to what I experienced when I went from the 27.5 to the 29s and such. Actually, it had the same consistency. The durability was fine. I mean, I'll say one thing actually. I mean, you know, I've never seen or heard of what is considered a puncture-proof tire. So yeah, I'm not going to lie to you, I have had some punctures on the E Wilds, but on the whole, they have stood up pretty well. And the one thing I will say is that I was able to gauge as to what tyre pressures I could run consistently throughout all my bikes. I mean, not one bike is running the same tyre pressures, I'll say that gladly, but I was able to gauge it a lot better compared to most other tyres in which I've experimented with. So I'm going to give the E-Wilds a good mark. I'd say, well, I'm not going to give it a mark at this point actually, because you haven't heard the Schwalbe Eddy Current, have you? So I guess we move on to the Schwalbe Eddy Currents. So the Eddy Current, the first bike I actually tested that on was the Kenevo, and going back to the video in which I decided to go on to the Eddy Currents was following from, again, my tether reached with the Butchers. They're a good tyre, you know, but they're not as versatile as what I would like for an EMTB. I mean, yes, I know that they've obviously changed the compound since, you know, when I was using them. I think we're now starting to see them on the Gen 3 Levos, and I've heard good things about them. But again, that's now, and I'm talking about Butchers a year ago. But nonetheless, anyway, Eddy Currents. So I bought two sets. I bought 27.5 by 2.6 and 27.5 by 2.8. And again, you have a front and rear specific variant of each tyre. Now, I will say this before I go any further. So at the time in which I purchased the Eddy Currents, this was at a time in which there was only one variant of the Eddy Currents. I am completely aware that there are a couple of variants. There's a trail compound, there's an enduro compound, and there is a downhill compound. Obviously, the compounds affect the weight, but the Addicts compound in such remains predominantly the same, as well as the sidewall thickness. But I will say this, at the time, I only had the one. Since that time, I have experimented with a lighter casing Eddy Currents, which is what Kenevo number 1 is rocking. But I ain't gonna lie to you, actually, I think it's gonna be the heavier duty casing one I end up going back to, actually, because better tyre. But anyway, the point being, Kenevo number 1, I was rocking the original variant of the Eddy Current. And I rocked a 2.6 up back and a 2.8 in the front. I ain't gonna lie, the characteristics of the tyre did denote that you could get away with a lot more monster trucking qualities compared to any other type of tyres without the risk of slashing the sidewalls or ripping off any knobs, or, you know, you thinking to yourself, is it a countdown to when I'm just going to burp the tyre and such. I mean, incidentally, I mean, you've heard me talking about the tyre pressures I was able to gauge and get away with the E Wilds. The Eddy Currents, it was a constant, not battle, but more so, I was more prone to seeing how low I could get that tyre to go. And funnily enough, on the Kenevo, I ended up going to 22 PSI in the back, which I ain't gonna lie, man, that's, for me, at 6'3", and like, okay, fine, I gladly say, like, you know, I'm not the lightest person, but it was unheard of. Like, I could literally get away with 22 PSI, actually. Like, I wouldn't run it ordinarily, but I could get away with it. And funnily enough, actually, like, the grip I got on the rear actually was pretty impressive. Nowadays, you know, I am running the Kenevo more at 24, 25 PSI in the back, just peace of mind. But it was an experience. It honestly was an experience. Oh yeah, and up front I was running 19 PSI actually, but that's the lowest I would go. But nowadays, like, up front, it's more like 22. But needless to say, anyway, for grip, for conformity qualities in which you would get out on the trails, it weren't bad. It weren't bad. And again, like I said, I was slapping them on the Rover wheel set just to make sure that the variables were the same. In terms of what makes them e-bike specific, that's where I'm kind of struggling. Now, it's only when I was in a particular circumstance where I could kind of see what they were claiming, it did become more noticeable. In particular, climbing. Now, yes, with the shoulder profile and the side knob profile, depending on whether or not you're looking at the front or the rear, you can kind of see where the climbing capabilities of those tires become more pronounced, especially in the loose conditions. Now, I say loose, not mud. In the loose conditions, yeah, it could work. In the mud, I'm struggling. I'm struggling, ladies and gentlemen. But I will say this, actually. I remember one climb I did, and I even stipulated in one of my videos, actually, I ended up being in trail mode, and I thought I would have to be in boost, but I got away with being in trail mode just to get up it. I had to jump into like a high cog, but it did it. And you could feel the motor kind of like propelling you up actually. And this is the Kenevo, like I said, and it was pretty decent, pretty decent. Transitioning from the Kenevo, the next bike I tested the Eddy Currents on was the Levo. I won't lie to you, the Levo is obviously a lighter bike than the Kenevo. And just for retrospect, in case you guys were wondering, you know, the Levo, it's a Gen 1. So the biggest capacity battery I could slap on that thing is a 504 alloy framed. But I will say this, my range suspicions as to what those tyres could bring to the table were confirmed as soon as I put it on the Levo, which is a lighter bike, which is, they weren't as good as what I thought they would be. Granted, like I said, you know, this is the original variant, so the original variants of the Eddy Currents are heavy. And again, I have been able to wrangle a lighter casing Eddy Current tyre, which, I'm not going to lie to you, ladies and gentlemen, like, you know, they're not cheap, like I said. But I have experimented with them in the 29er variants, shortly after messing around with the Levo as a 29er as well. And unfortunately, my suspicions were kind of confirmed even with the lighter casing Eddy Currents, which is, they do offer amazing grip and conforming aspects, and they're very versatile in approach, but the range is questionable. Like, my mission control parameters do not vary between any of the specialized bikes I rock. It is literally a case of, I put in a battery into a bike and I get the same characteristics out of the motor regardless. But it was just a case of, no, I couldn't understand the ethos as to what Schwalbe were bringing to the table in terms of their claim of an e-bike specific, with the exception of the variant of climbing in the loose. But I will go as far as to say that my experience with the Eddy Currents, which on a high note I was pretty impressed with, I could run those tyres at a very low pressure. Not once have I slashed the side walls, not once have I had a puncture, not once have I ripped off a side knob. They are a pretty tankable tyre, and I'm not going to go as far as to say that they're puncture proof, because I'm sure someone out there is going to say otherwise. But if someone were to say, have you come close to having a tyre which is truly puncture proof, I would go on record and say, yeah, the Eddy Currents, they're yeah, the Eddy Currents. And to emphasize that claim, like I said, the last bike in which I tested the Eddy Currents on were the Bafang Ultra EMTBs, as well as one Bafang M400 in a 27.5 variant. Yeah, obviously those motors, they can exceed 28 miles an hour. So imagine you just blasting through something hard packed, or in an environment, private property of course, where conditions can vary between dry, loose, rooty, and such. And literally, like, I was just tanking those tires to a point in which I was trying to get them to rip, to slash, to do anything, and they were just doing the job amazingly well actually. I mean, granted, I will go on record and say that when I was messing them with the Bafang Ultra EMTBs, my tire pressures were a little bit higher, just because I didn't want to kind of fail. So in the end, in the rear, as a 27.5, I was rocking 26 psi in the back and 23 up front. For the 29er, I was rocking 25 psi surprisingly, and 22 in the front. So the front remains kind of the same. My rear's varied, but I think the reason why I was running a higher pressure in the 27.5 was because that had more travel in the rear, 150 versus 140. Sorry, just referring to some notes. But needless to say, actually, yeah, I would say that if someone was looking for a tyre which you're just not going to get any problems with throughout, then yeah, Schwalbe Eddy Currents. So in the grand scheme of things, which tyre do I prefer? You could probably see where I'm going with this, ladies and gentlemen. It would honestly be the Michelin Wilds. Now, I'm not saying that the Michelin Wilds are perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, there are flaws with them. I mean, going back to what I was saying regarding the Schwalbe Eddy Currents, if you want a tyre which isn't gonna just break on you or anything along those lines, then I would say that is probably the best tyre for you to go with. But in terms of a versatile approach, because, you know, conditions may vary, and naturally you know, I'm old-fashioned, so I'm going to pick a tyre complements of my terrain, what I'm doing, what I'm riding and such. Those are qualities I usually look for. Hence why, for me, I don't go for Maxis like the DHF and DHR combination, because in my neck of the woods, there is nothing around me, in fact, I'll go on record and say that I don't see too many people rocking DHF or DHR in my neck of the woods, because there's nothing around it, around me, which warrants that kind of tyre. It's usually Magic Marys or, well, actually no, I've seen a couple of people rocking some Onza acrylics recently, so yeah. But anyway, the point being is it's a versatile tyre, the Michelin Wilds, in a broader scale compared to the Schwalbe Eddy Currents, which they are a tankable tyre. You're not gonna have any punctures or any, well, my experience, I haven't had any punctures, but you can get away with running them at a lower pressure. But overall, they're just not as versatile in terms of offering range. You know, out of the two tyres, they are technically the heaviest. I mean, even the lighter casing trail tyre, because I weighed them, it is technically heavier than the Wilds. So yeah, I'm gonna go with the Wilds, ladies and gentlemen. Like, you know, the last thing I want to do is to start putting on any necessary weight on any of my EMTBs. Currently, I'm looking at my Levo with the Fox fork, Levo, the Kenevo, sorry, and it is rocking the Wilds, like I said, in the 2.6 front and rear. So yeah, it complements that bike pretty well. But I can't really say that the Eddy Currents are favourable to that particular bike. With that being said, my first Kenevo and indeed my Bafang Ultra EMTBs, they are still rocking the Eddy Currents. But you have to remember, ladies and gentlemen, my first Kenevo, which has been upgraded to a dual crown fork, it's gonna rock that fork, and it's gonna rock those tyres. It's not been any problems. Like, if you want a tanking bike and you want a tyre which isn't going to mess you around, definitely the Eddy Currents. But overall, I can imagine the bigger question which people are going to ask is e-bike specific tyres, are they worth it? And my answer to that is yes and no. It kind of depends on your approach as to what you perceive to be e-bike specific, not the ethos of the manufacturers, your perception as to what you perceive as e-bike specific. Some people want to know that when they put something on their EMTB, they're going to get the best usage possible without having to swap it, change it, upgrade it, or to tolerate or think, when is it going to be like the countdown to when I'm going to have to replace it? Which I don't blame them. I mean, let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, you know, like, products for EMTBs, they're not getting cheaper, are they? And we're already starting seeing videos emerge as to cheaper offerings in which you can put on your EMTBs in order to increase longevity and for you not to pour in as much funds in order to keep them going. But I will go on record and say that there are some components which you don't really want to start skimping out on. And tyres, in fact, are one of those products. Now, don't get me wrong, I know there's going to be a fair few people who are going to say, I run this tyre, I run this tyre, I run this tyre, and I am completely aware that there are e-bike rated tyres out there which pure people have been running on their EMTBs and they're saying they're not getting any problems with. I, for one, agree to a certain extent. I mean, you know, who doesn't love the Maxis Minion DHF and DHR combination? You know, I've messed around with the Assegai and the Aggressors. The shorties, I'll be honest with you, I've had better mud tyres than them, but you know, that's just my opinion. But going as far as to say that, you know, an e-bike rated tyre versus an e-bike specific tyre, as long as the tyre is going to do what you want, and if you can gauge as to what type of terrain, environment, and what is preferable for your riding needs, stick with that. But if you are someone who needs an e-bike specific tyre for fear that you're gonna just rip the tyre, destroy the tyre, or you're having problems in terms of just going through tyres consistently and you're thinking, you know what, my EMTB is on the borderline heavier side, full fat, I need something which is going to cope with the mileage I'm just going to put through. These two tyres should be on your top of the list in order to consider. With that being said, I am aware that there are other manufacturers who are now entering the EMTB specific tyre category, Vittoria being one, and there's others out there as well, I'm sure. But I will say this, being as this has financially cost me, I may look into those tyres and I may give you my thoughts and opinions as to those tyres in the future, but don't expect anything too sudden, because I'll be honest with you, this has kind of taken me near enough like a year in order for me to put together. And again, my information, my notes as to what I've compiled each time I've ridden them, I've had to just sit there, make notes, study GoPro footages, my own FPV, in an effort for me to show you guys my findings. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, to summarize, e-bike specific tyres, which one would I go with? At this point, it would be the Michelin Wilds. As I've said, regardless of 27.5 or 29 inch, they are versatile in nature. I have run them as a mullet configuration. I do get amazing range from them. I'm able to run the bikes regardless of which tyre is on them. Mainstream EMTBs, with the exception of the Fang M620s, in eco or trail mode, regardless of the terrain. Versus the Schwalbe Eddy Currents, which usually I have to use a higher level of assist, but they are more of a tankable tyre. They last longer. I've never had any issues. I can run them lower and tyre pressures, and provided that the tyre pressures are low, you can get a conforming grip from the rear and the front, so you can run them soft. And the lighter casing tyres, I have been able to mess around with in the 29er comparison. I haven't been able to mess around with the lighter casing as the 27.5, but I imagine that my findings would be consistent with that tyre size as well. But hey, at the end of the day, this is my opinion, these are my findings. I can imagine that all of you are going to have different opinions of your own, to which case feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. And of course, if you've got any questions in relation to this video, hit me up on Instagram, hit me up on EMTB forums, send me an email. And of course, if you do like this type of stuff, hit that like button, comment down below as I said. Until next time, take it easy.